There is a threshold, roughly 300 meters on a flat road, a little less in a crowd, where a person you love stops being a person and becomes a shape. Not the face you'd know anywhere, not the particular tilt of the shoulders you could pick out from 100 yards, just a shape. Dark against whatever is behind it, then the size of your thumbnail held at arm's length, then smaller still, until it becomes a genuine question of whether you are seeing them or only deciding that you are. Most people keep waving long after this point, not because they think the person can still see them. They know they can't. They wave anyway. In 1983, a developmental psychologist named Carol Mayer spent 14 months standing in the departure hall of the Minneapolis St. Paul International Airport with a yellow legal pad and a Casio stopwatch. She was not studying grief. She was studying what she called behavioral extension, the human tendency to continue performing an action past the point where it has any observable effect. Goodbyes, she thought, were a near-perfect natural laboratory. There was a legible moment, the passenger disappearing around the corner, descending the escalator, passing through the frosted glass security door, when the departure became complete, when no amount of waving could reach the person leaving. She wanted to know what the body did in that moment. She expected the wave to stop. What she found, clocking 412 separate departures over 14 months, was something she hadn't predicted. The average person continued waving for 22 seconds after the departing party had passed out of sight. Not the visibly emotional goodbyes specifically, all of them. The business traveler watching a spouse walk away, the college student watching parents leave, the older woman in a green wool coat who arrived at the base of the same escalator every Thursday at 11:15. 22 seconds, median, across the full sample. 22 seconds of waving at the space a person had just occupied. Mayer's graduate students call this waving at the door, quietly, when she wasn't in the room. The phrase caught something real. The gesture had transferred. It was no longer aimed at a person. It was aimed at the last known location of a person, the way a dog circles the patch of floor where the other dog used to sleep. The fact alone is poignant and mostly small. But Mayer did something with it. She approached 43 of the wavers directly, gently, in the minutes after the departure, before they'd moved far from the terminal. She didn't ask about the specific goodbye. She asked about their history with departures, how airports felt to them, whether there was a particular moment in a goodbye that registered most heavily afterward. 71% described the same moment without being led there. Not the hug, not the last spoken words, but the instant the figure went from distinguishable person to anonymous shape. The sensory vanishing. That threshold, 300 meters, or the frosted glass door, or the bend in the road, sat heavier than anything that had been said or held. When Mayer asked what was happening in the body during those final seconds of the wave, the answers sorted into two clear groups. About a third kept waving because they were covering for uncertainty. They weren't fully sure the person was gone. The wave was insurance. In case there was one last glance back, they didn't want the person to turn and find no one there. The other two-thirds said something quieter and stranger. Stopping felt like letting go. As long as the arm was up, the departure was still in process. The moment the arm came down, the person was gone. And it was the waver, not the lever, who decided when that was. So the wave was not for the person disappearing. It was a held seam between still happening and already over. The waver was stretching the middle of the goodbye, the only place where neither fully here nor fully gone accurately described the situation. The woman in the green wool coat came every Thursday regardless. Maya watched her for several weeks before introducing herself. She was perhaps 70. She waved the full 22 seconds plus usually 10 more, then walked to a plastic chair near the coffee stand, sat briefly with her hands in her lap, and left. When Maya finally asked, the woman said she had a daughter in Denver who visited on the first Thursday of every month. On the other 3 Thursdays, the ones without a daughter, the woman still drove 40 minutes to stand at the base of the same escalator. She stood for a few minutes. Then she went home. Maya asked why. The woman considered it carefully. "It helps me remember how it feels," she said. "When she goes, I stand here and remember how it feels. And then I stop." She said this without apparent sadness, the way someone describes stretching before a run. Developmental psychologists studying infant attachment have a phrase for the longer version of this behavior. They call it separation practice. A toddler watching a parent leave a room is not simply experiencing absence. They are running a low-stakes rehearsal of return. They are training a neural prediction circuit to hold a model of someone no longer visible, to believe, without immediate confirmation, that the person will come back. The wave aimed at a closing door is not grief. It is a maintenance signal. The brain keeping a connection warm across a gap it cannot yet measure. That training compounds across a life. It becomes the wave at the airport, the held gaze at the rear window of a car, the staying at the window a full minute after the taillights have turned the corner. For years, the easy interpretation of all this was, we are rehearsing permanent loss. We are building gradual tolerance for the final departure, the one without a return ticket. Every small goodbye desensitizes us incrementally, the way cold water desensitizes the hand. This is not wrong, but it is also not the interesting part. When Maya called her 43 waivers once a year for the 3 years following the study, she was tracking something she'd begun to suspect from the interviews. She asked how the relationships had developed, how the connections had held or changed. And she asked, carefully, about anticipatory grief. Not grief for someone already lost, but the particular shadow that falls over a living relationship when you become aware that it will not last forever. The dread that haunts a present love because you know, somewhere in the register of honest things, that it ends. The waivers with the most developed departure rituals, the ones who describe the dot moment with the most precision, who felt the sensory vanishing most acutely, reported significantly lower anticipatory grief about the people they were closest to. Maya published this finding in 1987 in a short paper that was never widely cited. But in her personal notes, donated to the University of Minnesota archive by her daughter in 2003, she had written a single sentence beside the data, underlined twice in blue ink. They are not practicing the loss. They are practicing the after. The after. The motion that follows grief, not the grief itself. The specific, undiscussed act of lowering the arm when the shape is gone, turning away from the last place the person stood and walking back into the life that continues. Not the endurance of absence, but the return to ordinary time that absence requires. Grief stops people, The after requires them to move. And every rehearsal goodbye, every driveway, every train platform, every departure gate is practicing that motion, practicing the turning back. Now consider the dot. The person walking away does not practice this. They have momentum, direction, the neurological experience of going toward rather than watching recede. Research on departure physiology consistently finds that the person physically leaving a location activates neural systems associated with agency and approach. Not happiness exactly, but forward motion, which is a partial anesthetic. The leaver walks through doors. The stayer watches the door. The stayer does the harder work from a fixed point. Maintain the model of someone no longer present. Continue predicting their existence in some unseen world. And then, the path that nobody names as a skill, choose at a specific second to stop predicting, to lower the arm, to turn, to go back to the life that remains. That second is not defeat. It is not the failure of love or the beginning of forgetting. It is what love eventually and inevitably requires of the person who stays, to see the distance for what it is, not to soften it or abbreviate it, and then to live forward through the rest of the day, and the next week, and all the ordinary time that doesn't feature the person, but doesn't cancel them either. You have felt the arm go tired. You have held it up anyway, past the point of reason, buying one more second of middle. You have squinted into the distance and asked yourself whether you could still see them, and answered yes, probably yes, maybe, and then the honest answer. And then you lowered the arm, and you turned. 300 meters, 22 seconds after they've gone. Practice 10,000 times before the one that would have mattered most. The shape is gone. The day continues. You are still here, which is the only place you could possibly be, and which is, it turns out, enough.